All right, so I know we've been covering a lot of content. One of the things that Iklak did mention about this program is that, well, he did a little bit, but let me reiterate it. It comes at you really fast. Part of this process, this boot camp, is to throw as much information at you from as many different angles as possible for you to freak out. The appropriate response is, I am overloaded with information. I don't know where to start. That's because that is actually the general state of being an entrepreneur, is that you will never have enough time, resources, or money to have it completely handled. So you're just going to have to get used to chaos and having to pick through as much as you possibly can and prioritize. So there's going to be so much information this week, you won't know where to begin. And you're going to then have to develop those skills of prioritization. I would say, as an entrepreneur myself, that is one skill I haven't fully mastered yet, but that is the most incredibly important skill to have just to be successful in life, just in general. All right? So Iklak talked about the what part of the Berkeley method. I'm going to talk about the how. You guys are going to experience some new things this week, new ways of learning that we're going to be introducing you to today. And we want you guys to be open to these new experiences. It's going to be stuff that you've never done in class before in a university setting, but it's supposed to help you with this mindset that we've talked a lot about. So let me start a little bit by asking this question. What do entrepreneurs actually do? What is it that we sit down and do? And most of the people, by the way, who'll be here to talk to you guys are former or current entrepreneurs. So you're going to get this perspective from people who are in the practice of starting companies. But I'll break it down into three basic things, three fundamental things that are part of this entrepreneurial experience. And the first thing is, it's a social activity. People often think that starting a tech company is a very technical exercise, or it's a business exercise, but it's actually a social experiment. That's the fundamental part, because you can't do it alone. You can only do it with a bunch of people that are in concert working on something together. And if you can't get those people aligned, you will not be successful. There are thousands of companies out there that have failed, not because their technology was bad or the market opportunity wasn't there. It's because they couldn't get the band together and not from breaking up. So it is fundamentally a social activity. And one of the things in Iklak's slides that he presented, which are great, one thing I would highlight from that is, the last two ways of looking for opportunities, by being around people who are in that field or researching that field. There's two states that you can be in. One is you're either an insider or you're an outsider. And a lot of great companies have been founded by people who are not insiders. They're outside of the industry. They weren't experts. They loved the industry, but as amateurs, not as people who are PhDs in that industry. And there's something to be said for being an outsider, that you see opportunities that people on the inside don't see. So if you're an outsider, there's a lot of places for you to find great companies to build. But if you are an insider, let's say you are a PhD or 30 years doing research in a particular area, find an outsider or find many outsiders to talk to who can give you perspective on what you do. Because those are the people who haven't been dealing with those problems for decades, who might see a different angle. So surround yourself with people who are completely different from you. This is absolutely a social activity. The second thing, and Iklak talked about this before, which is about failure and learning. So entrepreneurs, by the very definition of what they're doing, right? You are doing something brand new. By definition, there are no set rules around it because it's new, right? You're in new territory, which means you're going to be bouncing around and experimenting to figure out what is actually there. So you have to get used to this learning by failure process of trial and error, right? Because there's no textbook, literally, because it's brand new. You are writing the book on it, and so you have to get used to testing something and seeing if it works out or not. If you're not very good at dealing with failure, and I mean little failure, like you're doing a test and it doesn't turn out okay, if you're not good at that, this is going to be painful. So you've got to get used to being able to test things out quickly and figuring out if it's the right direction for you. The last thing you're going to do as an entrepreneur is to teach. The greatest the modern teacher when it comes to technology was Steve Jobs, by far, because he was able to not only teach other tech people, but basically the general population on how to use new technology. I mean, we remember when he launched the iPad and he was just laughed at for naming it the iPad because it was associated with a feminine care product. We don't think about that anymore. He literally changed the definition of iPad, right, of the word pad. We don't associate that with anything other than a new tablet, right? So the power of teaching is incredible here. And that is the exercise you will be embarking on if you go through this first few steps of building a company, learning to find out what this product and the needs are. And then you have to go out and convince a bunch of people that what you've built is something that they should put money and time towards. So you ultimately become a teacher. Now, circling back to this course and this program, I talked to lots of people about what we do here at CET, that we teach innovation and entrepreneurship. And the first questions, you can see it on their face, is, is it even possible to teach this stuff, right? Can you teach creativity? Can you teach entrepreneurship? And my answer to that, as my students know when I get a question I cannot answer, is say, I think that's the wrong question to ask. It's not whether we can teach entrepreneurship. I think it's a matter of whether you can learn it. Because it's like multivariable calculus. Not everybody can learn multivariable calculus, but it doesn't mean you can't teach it. There's a certain group of people who can learn from it. Now, a note about this. Some of the best entrepreneurs I know, just caveat this, are people who fundamentally can't learn from anyone else. They just don't listen. Some of you are here. I can see many of you are already asleep. There are different types of learners, and we recognize that in this program. And so you also need to do an assessment. We'll talk about doing self-assessments tomorrow in my other lecture. But you have to understand how you learn. We were talking about learning through failure, right? You test things out and you learn from them. There's two ends of the spectrum, in my perspective, on the learning process. On one end, I call them Braille learners. They're people, if you guys are familiar with Braille, people who are blind to read. They have to touch, the dots to see that they're. There's some people who have to touch things in order to know that they exist. They won't listen to anyone else to tell them that that object exists or that the oven is hot. They have to actually touch the oven to know that it's hot. Okay? If you're one of those, I call you a Braille learner. That's not better or worse. It just means that's how you learn. You have to touch it, feel it, and get burned by it, right? On the other end of the spectrum is what I call osmosis learners. People who learn just by being around other people and reading and watching and observing. They don't have to feel the oven to know that it's hot. They're perfectly happy to watch someone else touch it, see that their hand gets burned, and they're like, oh, I learned from that other person recoiling from touching the oven. That must be hot. Understand where on that spectrum you are. It's really important because that dictates what the kinds of educational tools you should be pursuing. If you're an osmosis learner, going online and watching YouTube videos or coming to our lectures, those are probably useful for you. If you are a Braille learner, just go out into the world and test things out and touch stuff. Just don't run into traffic, right? But just go and do stuff. You are someone who needs to be in the mix all the time. So that's a note about that. But going back to how we teach, right? It's not a matter of whether we can teach this. It's a matter of if you can learn it or how you learn is a more appropriate way to look at it. Now, I want to talk a little bit about your education. Most of you come either from Berkeley or from another higher institution where you have spent years and years being educated. And I want to talk a little bit about why that will be a disadvantage to you. Having gone to university and through formal Western and Eastern education, actually, will make you less prepared to be an entrepreneur than if you did not go to school. I'll tell you that right now. That sounds odd. Let me go into that in more detail. Do you guys know what this animal is? What is it? Crow. What are crows famous for? Anyone want to share? Louder, please. Mimicry? Okay. What else? Stealing, yes. They are very sneaky and they do steal. What else? Bad luck. Yes. This is true. This is true. They are ominous, right? Very ominous. What else?
The sound.
Sound, okay. And what does the sound denote? Well, it denotes that they're communicating, and they do. In fact, they have been proven. There's a lot of research going on in several universities. University of Washington has some great researchers who have discovered that crows not only pass information to their offspring, but their offspring passes that information to their offspring. So without the grandparent having ever met the grandchild, information has passed generationally in crows. It's a level of intelligence. It's phenomenal stuff that they've been able to witness. They have been witnessed. They're incredibly smart, dropping nuts in front of moving vehicles so that the vehicle will break open the nut so they can get into the food. Okay. They have been seen swooping in front of cars just to see it swerve because there's no other function other than all the other crows are up there laughing, right? So they're brilliant and kind of evil, actually. Yeah, so it's kind of ominous. They're actually considered one of the smartest animals on the planet next to primates. We've had to rewrite biology books constantly because we see things that they do that are getting closer and closer to human intelligence, one of which is the use of tools. Okay, they have been observed, of course, using these kinds of tools to push or pull food out of crevices. But what's more amazing is that they've been seen, like in this exercise, making their own tools. So here, there's food that it can't reach here. It sees this long stick in this contraption. Probably is like, what the hell is that? It can't reach the stick directly, but it knows it's long enough to pull the food out. It also sees this small stick is not long enough to pull the food out directly. But if it takes this off the string, bends it, pulls the long stick out, and uses the long stick to pull the food out, it can do that. Now, there's a YouTube video of a crow doing a 7-step test like this, in which if it gets the order incorrect, it will not reach the food. It sits there for half a minute and then figures out all the steps and does it in the right order. Now, I point this out because I have students at Berkeley who cannot do this. Okay? And nothing to say about Berkeley students. It's that they are used to being given their own tools. They've never been expected to make their own tools. Every time they need to figure something out, there is a formula handed to them in class by their professors, right? I need to titrate something. Here are the instructions. I can just go to the internet. Something is available to me to solve a problem that already exists. Someone's going to just hand it to me because I've expected that my entire academic career, because ultimately the way I am rewarded is to see how much of this knowledge I have retained, and I can mimic back later to show how smart I am because of how much information I have retained. You are not tested for synthesis. You are not tested to see what you can apply or to make new. Right? You've never been expected to make your own tools. This is what we call deductive education, and it's unfortunate because we have we are born to be inductive learners. Ever since you were little, if any of you guys have 5-year-old kids around, either your own or brothers, sisters, cousins, or whatever, what is their favorite question? Why? And when you answer that question, what do they then do? And it never ends, right? And this is why most people don't have more than 1 or 2 kids. Yeah. But this is the process when we're young of how we learn. We look at a result, and we ask the question, why? And only through your formal education has this been beaten out of you. You're actually deducted if you ask the question, why? Because smart kids are supposed to know the answer before they even show up to class, right? You're supposed to know the answer before your professor even asks the question, because that's the definition of being smart, not asking the right questions. And so this is unfortunate because inductive learning is how we're naturally set up to think. And this is also the seed of entrepreneurship, is to look at the world and go, why is it done this way? Is there a better way of doing it than this? And if we spent all this time beating that out of you, you have stopped asking if things can be improved. And we need you guys to get back to the point where you're asking yourselves, can things be improved? In fact, this gets worse. What I am proposing is that your entire university education has been set up to go against your entrepreneurial instincts. Okay? You have been trained through 12 to 16 to 18 years of education to compete with each other, to not only look at each other as competitors, but there's scarcity in grades. Only one of you can get an A. And it's famous Berkeley here at the chemistry department. You walk into your first chemistry class, they ask you to look left and then to look right and say, only one of the 3 of you will be remaining in this class by the end of the semester. I mean, that is a famous line from the chemistry department. And it's actually somewhat true because people drop that class like crazy. But that gets you in the mindset, not that the people around you are resources, but they're competitors. And that is incredibly toxic. My phone is, there we go. All right. So let me walk you through what I mean by your education has been the opposite of what you need. In terms of risk-reward, you've been taught not to look dumb in front of your fellow students and your professors, right? In fact, this is gendered. They have found that more women are reluctant to raise their hands because they don't want to look dumb. More men are willing to look dumb than women. You guys know that kind of as, yeah, you guys kind of know that. That's not, you know. But in innovation, you have to risk being wrong because something brand new, you don't know if it's right or wrong. You have to take that risk. In terms of ethos, students are taught, especially if you're engineering students, the ethos of perfection. If you don't do it right, the plane will crash and the train will go off the rails. You are taught to be perfect or things will collapse. Problem is, if you wait for perfection, Google will kill you. That is a proven law of physics. All right? So you need the ethos of just good enough. And I know some of you engineers.
You might need to look at physics laws.
Yeah, yes. I'm going to write a new one. But so many of you guys who come from really traditional educational models, this is going to be painful for you because you've been trained you have to get it exactly right. And so we'll be pushing you guys to just be good enough. All right, in terms of collaboration, I was talking about knowing the answer before the question is even asked as a student. But in innovation, you have to ask for help. You just have to be willing to ask people if there is an answer that they can help you with. You're tested individually in student world. You are rewarded as a group in innovation. It doesn't matter if your code compiles, if your co-founder cannot sell it, you all fail. It is a group activity all the way through. So you can't just say, hey, I got my part done. That doesn't work that way, right? Last part is, everyone is a competitor when you're a student, especially when you have curves. And Berkeley's famous for having curved grades. I am absolutely against curve grades. I don't think it's a healthy way of students looking at one another. Because in innovation, everyone is a resource. Even your competitors are a resource. I can tell you I had the cell phone numbers of the CEOs of my competitors, all 3 major ones, and we would talk fairly regularly. I would say maybe twice a year we would have phone calls. And a lot of it is just comparing notes. See how we're doing against Google. It's always a common conversation. But also just where we think the industry is going, because we are all small companies with very small marketing budgets. And what we were doing is we were benefiting from the fact that everyone else was being covered by the same press, same interviewers, the same magazines, and they're mentioning all of the startups. And we realized we were basically sharing a marketing budget. So your competitors make you better. They make you relevant, because if you're the only one in that industry, is it that you were a genius and you're the only one who thinks there's value there? Or is there really no value there, right? So you need to have others help validate the space you're in is worth investing in. So don't look at your competitors as your enemies. They're helpful because they help you be better, and they help you get credibility for your industry. So ultimately, it comes down to, in the student mentality, you are given this zero-sum game. That somehow your loss is someone else's gain and your gain is someone else's loss. And that is not the mentality we want you to pursue your startup with. We want you to have the orientation of everything has to be accretive. Everyone benefits, right? Your team, you share in your successes and in your failures. Your partners, your investors, and even your competitors. If one of your competitors dies, that is really bad for you. I'm not sure I want to repeat that. If one of your competitors closes up shop, your ability to raise money has just gotten harder. Because now you have to answer for the fact that a competitor has died, that there is not enough market for both of you. There's probably 3 or 4 competitors in that space. So you don't want your competitors to die. You want your competitors and yourself to be successful, that the sea is raising all boats, because you will have to answer for the failures of your competitors in every VC meeting or investor meeting you go into. Okay? So don't wish ill on your competitors, because it comes back to hurt you. All right? So with this in mind, that the mentality, right, that you have been taught since you were a child might be going against you. And I'm talking mentality is you don't even notice it. It's the framework that you see the world, right? You walk into a class like this and you go, okay, what am I going to have to do to get an A? Look at the syllabus and go, okay, what things do I need to cover? What's the homework, right? When's everything due? That's your mentality. You walk into a scenario and the framework of how to solve for this is already there. In a startup, it's not there. You're starting from scratch. No one's going to give you this framework. You have to get it yourself. So what we've done here is that we have looked to change the way that we teach. We use succinct lectures. Hopefully this was succinct. All right. Where we focus on both the psychology and culture of where you come from, not just your ethnic culture, what country you're from, but also your academic culture. Many of you guys have been trained as engineers, and so your mind is going to be set towards finding the answer. With entrepreneurship, there might not be that one answer, and entrepreneurship is also messy and chaotic, which engineering oftentimes tries to get rid of so that you can have clarity. With entrepreneurship, sometimes you have to deal with just a certain level of chaos and be okay with it. Also, the smartest person in the room doesn't win. It's not a matter of being the smartest person. There seems to be this whole competition about who has the best grades or who's the best in class or whatever. You have to get rid of that thinking. You have to think more about, rather than being right, being effective. So this is a battle you're going to have with your own psyche. All right? And then we also bring in the voice of the practitioner. Most of our instructors and lecturers are people who have been not only successful at starting companies, but they've also failed. So they can give you the delta of what they did, right? How do you know the success that you had anything to do with what you did? Unless you've actually failed to give yourselves, yeah, when I failed, I did these things that when I was successful, I didn't do, right? So we want to give you guys that delta. Also, it's a short time frame on purpose. We want to give you that sense of urgency, that anxiety that you would have in the startup world, because I would say a very good portion of you guys won't start companies, a successful company, just statistically, right? Not necessarily because you're not competent, it's because it's not really what you want to do. What you find in this whole process, if you find the chaos and the speed and the amount of time that you have to spend here, something that you don't like, then maybe you should join a company that's further in the development, maybe 3 or 4 years into VC funding, that they're a little more stable, that it's not as chaotic, but still innovative, but not in that early stage. So this is about, again, when I say the type of learning that you do, also figure out what level of stress and what level of chaos you're willing and able to deal with, okay? Also, we want to have you build muscle memory. This is why we're going to have you guys go through these exercises and use games, because we want you guys to experience what it's like to see if this is what you want to do. And so these games that we talk about, this is the unique part of our methodology of teaching, is with these 3 types of games. There's puzzles, social games, mostly social games, some Legos. Since this is a very compact week, we won't cover too many games, but we'll have a few. The first thing I'd like you guys to do is look at your badges. You might notice there's some colored dots on your badges. Notice some of you guys have the same colors and some of you guys have different colors. I'm not going to tell you what they mean. We want you guys to, over time, kind of figure that out on your own by possibly talking to other people with the same color and different colors. And after a while, you might develop some patterns as to why that is. And then we'll be playing some games based on that information. But this game-based learning allows you to do a couple of things. One is to figure out how well you do with strategy. Can you come up with an approach in which we're not giving you the strategy, you have to come up with it yourself. Again, we're not going to give you formulas, we're not going to give you instructions. You have to find ways to do this. This is a classic thing you have to do in startup land. Problem solving. How good you are at framing problems that are handed to you. I mean, we'll give you a problem, then you have to figure out the best way for your team to look at it and to solve it. How good are you at using resources? Some people are brilliant, but they can't work in groups, and so they don't leverage all the smart people in their group. They just are individual contributors. So this is also something you learn, is how well you use your resources. How do you collaborate? How do you compete? Now, in order for you to be successful, we talked about this being a social activity, you have to trust people and share your ideas. In almost every program I've been in, there's always 1 or 2 people who say, I'm not willing to share my idea, right? Or I'm uncomfortable sharing this with you unless you sign an NDA. No one signs NDAs anymore, right? And in fact, you'll notice the only people who have you sign an NDA, typically, are large companies who want to protect themselves by saying anything that is stated in the conversation belongs to no one. It's not to protect the person who has the idea. It's to protect the person who's listening from being sued by the person who wants to protect their idea. So understand there's no way of protecting your ideas. It goes down to execution. Those who execute get to protect their idea. Frankly, the idea changes so much from the beginning to end that there's really nothing to protect, and you're focusing on the wrong thing. So this is a great thing to test out. And remember, too, you've been trained to not share, right? When you're doing a test, you're supposed to do this so that no one can see. I'm not encouraging you now in class to share your answers unless that's part of the class, but you have been trained not to share. So these games lets us all see whether you are collaborative or too competitive, if you use your resources, problem solver, and ultimately, you want to see how you behave under stress and in groups. We've seen kids flip out. They start screaming at their teammates, and they didn't notice they did that. That's another thing, is self-awareness. A lot of these things, as you're in the game, you don't see yourself behave in these ways. And why we run them is so that others can show you how you might behave in a startup before you get there. So again, I want to reiterate, entrepreneurship is a team sport. How do you behave in this group? Do you trust? Do you participate? This is a key one. I would say if you're from an Asian country, point this out, oftentimes people tend towards observing versus participating. If you're from Berkeley, you tend to participate over observing. You need to have a balance of both. You need to be participating and observing both the people around you and yourself as you're participating. It's weird and difficult to be self-aware in the moment while you're doing stuff. It's like having an out-of-body experience, right? But you need to get really good at being able to do both of these things. Maybe not concurrently, but flipping back and forth. Now, most entrepreneurship programs, we talk about how to do stuff. The lean startup, here are tools how to do things. What we're really interested in is helping you really figure out how you deal with stress, conflict, and nebulous direction. These are psychological and cultural things. If you can handle that stuff in your team, everything else you can handle. The big thing here is conflict. Do not avoid conflict. I tend to avoid conflict. And so you'll only have a week to do this, but this one is key. If your team can conflict in a positive and healthy way, you are going to have a really strong team. If you guys all completely agree on everything, why is everyone on the team? Why are you paying 5 people to do one person's opinion, right? So you should have conflicting ideas. You should have conflicting opinions because that's how you know that you have lots of people working on the same problem. Okay? So you have healthy conflict, and we'll talk more about that in a bit. All right, so I'm going to just close up here shortly. The intent of each game is for you to ultimately understand how to prioritize, communicate, have empathy. It's not about being perfect. It's about, at the end, assessing you and yourself, or you, your teammates, how you make decisions together. Do you anticipate issues together? And how do you contribute or execute? Okay. This past fall, I had 20 some odd teams in my Challenge Lab course where within 15 weeks, the students have to build a team, a functioning app, and a business model. At the end, we had probably a good 15 or 16 real applications, which maybe 10 were real businesses that came out of this, right? And the ones that weren't successful, they almost invariably said, we had really big team issues. We couldn't pull it together. When I say this is a team exercise, it is 100% a social experience, okay? And if you can't get it together as a team, you're not a good team player, or you're not very good at conflict, it's going to be a painful process. Not just for startups, because a startup is a really good vehicle to learn this, but almost any business setting, you're going to have trouble if you cannot work with other people. So it's a good place to start. Okay. A last note about empathy. Some of you guys give you a definition of what this means. Empathy is essentially, in this context, taking a look at other people and understanding their pain and understanding their feelings, their motivations, what's going through their heads. Some of you guys are really good at reading people, and some other people, this might be the first time anyone's talked to you about reading other people. And what I mean by reading other people, I don't mean in the context of reading them and telling them off. That's one definition. reading them is looking at their facial expressions, their body language, the words that they choose, and their behavior to see whether or not they're with you or not. Some people are really bad at communicating, but if you're really good at reading other people, you can accommodate for that. And this is something when you talk to customers is going to be incredibly important. Customers don't tell you explicitly whether they like something or not oftentimes, and so you have to read how they're responding. So this is, again, in these games, you'll be able to see how well you do by reading others. This one's key. You need to solve your entire team's problem, not just yours. Again, this goes back to team dynamics. Okay. So Iklak talked a little bit about this, about behaviors and mindset. We can't really tell you what your mindset is, but we can see how you behave. And so these games allow us to see how you guys behave, and we think that denotes something that's going on in your head about how you solve problems. So, and oftentimes it's cultural. So, so the last thing I want to leave you guys with in this educational model is that we like you to do some reflections. So we'd love for you to keep track of what you're learning. And I know several CEOs of pretty successful companies, on a daily basis, they do a decision reflection at the end of their day to outline what decisions they made that day and whether they should have made that decision or not. Was it a good decision? Why did they make that decision? And they keep a running dialogue with themselves about these kinds of decisions, right? This is really important to keep track of how you're doing, to benchmark yourself. So I recommend that you guys do this anyway, just in life. But during this week, this would be great for you guys to do that. Maybe
you want to delete the meditation now.
What?
I'm not sure. Is something happening? I'm not sure.
I just put the auditorium to sleep. That's awesome. All right. So now that we're all asleep, including the lights, I've been asked to talk about the rules of engagement for this week. All right. So we want you guys to take risks. There is no consequences for you guys when you take your risks. Now, when we say take risks, we don't mean to do anything dangerous or illegal. Okay? And oftentimes in my Berkeley classes, I spend about 15 minutes in a Q&A to outline what dangerous or illegal means. But since we don't have that time, I just use your self-restraint and just make sure you don't do anything that will, well, you can embarrass yourself, just don't embarrass Berkeley. That's actually a low bar. But okay, it is okay to fail. Please go out and take risks. Put yourself outside of your comfort zone. And it is also okay to discover you are not an entrepreneur. Okay? And what I mean by that, and I will clarify, an early stage entrepreneur. Some people, this early stage where they're constantly trying to find resources from people, ask people to do unreasonable things like work for free or to raise money from people, that might not be you, and that's okay. You don't like the chaos and all of the uncertainty, that's okay. But give you an example, the most financially rewarding role in startups is being the CFO of a pre-IPO company. So the 2 years before a company goes IPO, they typically hire a CFO to come in and be the adult who puts in all of the stuff that's going to make the company suitable for Wall Street. They get a pretty good chunk of the company to do that. It's almost guaranteed that it's going to go public because that's why they hired you, right? And then once you go public, you become even more famous because you successfully brought this company to Wall Street. And then you get hired by yet another really successful startup that wants to go through the same process. And at the end of your career, you're probably 10 times more wealthy than most of the startup CEOs that you've helped because for the amount of risk that you put in. Because in every company, you're pretty much a guaranteed success, right? So For those of you who are risk averse but still want to be part of innovation, that might be the key role for you, is to look to be the CFO of a late stage startup. So finally, check your dots on your name tag. And then I think Vicky is going to have you guys do a game here. But any questions before that? Maybe we have time for 1 or 2 questions if you have any questions.